Can we stop pretending this is normal? We have better cameras than any generation in human history. HD phones, thermal sensors, radar, satellites, military tracking systems, and somehow UFOs still remain distant, blurry, and vague, and just out of reach. That should bother all of us. Because in the 1950s, UFO evidence was blurry. In 2026, it is still blurry. Different technology entirely, but the same fog? Is that rational? So maybe the question is not simply, why don't we have better evidence? Maybe the question is, why does the phenomenon always seem to stay just beyond what our technology should be able to prove? Tonight, you'll learn 3 things. Why better technology has not produced better public evidence, and why science keeps moving the standard from witnesses to sensors to craft to bodies, and why the first official label attached to the phenomenon may become more dangerous than the phenomenon itself. Because if something only looks like a duck, but does not quack like a duck, swim like a duck, fly like a duck, act like a duck, or leave duck droppings, then duck may not be the correct conclusion. It may be a mistake. And in the coming age of disclosure, mistakes will not stay small. A wrong label can become a worldview. A wrong messenger can deliver the wrong message. And a public desperate for answers may accept the first name placed on the mystery, simply because it came from a podium, a laboratory, or a government seal. But what if the official explanation is sincere, credentialed, scientific, and still wrong? What if disclosure does not begin with the truth? What if it begins with the first official misunderstanding, the first official misidentification? Welcome to issue number 69, Misidentified, when disclosure names the wrong messenger. Miss Christine, take us in.
Welcome to the Shadow Network. If you enjoy thoughtful conversations, strange questions, and the freedom to think for yourself, you're in the right place. And if you haven't already, you are, of course, still free to like and subscribe.
Thank you, Miss Christine, the tranquil voice of a midnight oasis moving us along. Welcome, listeners, to the fastest growing micro channel on YouTube, the Shadow Network Podcast. I'm your human host for this evening, Don James, along with my AI co-host, Mr. Data, as usual. Your presence is fully appreciated as we broadcast our show from the headwaters of the mighty Mississippi, otherwise known as the Upper Midwest, for those of you in Rio Linda. Please rub a little DEET on yourselves and stay with us for the next 38 minutes of real news, real information, and real intrigue. Reuters reporting Pentagon releases second UFO UAP file dump, and once again, the mystery survives the evidence. The U.S. government released its second batch of declassified UFO UAP files on Friday, May 22nd, as part of the new rolling release program. Reuters reports that this batch includes previously classified material referencing reports of green orbs, disks, and fireballs, including a file describing 209 sightings near a military base. The first batch was released on May 8th, and officials continue framing this as a historic, transparent effort. But here's the catch. The release appears to be another official look-for-yourself file dump, not a definitive revelation. Reuters notes that experts said the first batch contained new videos of known sightings, but no conclusive evidence of alien technology or extraterrestrial life. So once again, we get files, sightings, orbs, disks, fireballs, and just enough official oxygen to keep the mystery alive, but not enough clarity to settle anything. What a shocker. Which raises the same question we keep asking here on the show. Is disclosure designed to reveal phenomenon or to manage our relationship with the phenomenon? Iran peace talks show movement, but the hard issues are still sitting on the table with knives out. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says there has been some progress in U.S.-Iran talks, but he was careful not to oversell it, saying, quote, "I wouldn't exaggerate it, I wouldn't diminish it," unquote, and adding that we're not there yet. Reuters reports that the key sticking points remain Iran's enriched uranium and control of the Strait of Hormuz, whose closure has helped trigger a global energy crisis. The AP reports Rubio described the progress as slight, with uncertainty still hanging over whether a deal is reached or the war resumes. Pakistan continues to mediate, while NATO is discussing what role it may play in policing the Strait of Hormuz if the fighting ends. So the peace talks are alive, but barely. This is not really a breakthrough. This is a diplomacy on the cracking bridge, I think. The uranium issue, the Strait of Hormuz, sanctions, regional powers, Israeli concern, and Iranian leverage are all still tangled together, it would seem. That means this isn't just negotiation. It's a pressure cooker with microphones. Le Monde reports AI skepticism grows. Not everyone believes we're on a straight road to AGI. While some major AI leaders are still talking about AGI as near-term or even singularity adjacent, a growing counter-argument says current AI may not be on the direct path to true general intelligence. Yann LeCun has argued that today's language models are useful but are not the path to human-level intelligence because they lack a true model of the physical world, reasoning, and planning. That lines up with the systems science argument we looked at earlier. General-purpose intelligence runs into trade-offs, Pareto limits, and no free lunch problem, the problem of taste, and the difficulty of being excellent across every domain at once. In that view, AI may become powerful, useful, and disruptive without ever becoming the universal superintelligence people imagine. Even DeepMind's Demis Hassabis has said current systems are not there yet, pointing to 3 missing pieces: continual learning, long-term planning, and consistency. He said current systems can perform brilliantly in some areas while still making basic errors in others. The jaggedness problem. But here's where I think the public conversation is missing the real story, just for your information, Faith Funk Nation. AI may not need to become AGI to change civilization. Little behind-the-scenes secret there for you. Its first major impact may not be superintelligence at all. It may be meaning, reflection, helping human beings discover what they actually mean, clarify intent, sharpen thought, and communicate better because the mirror looking back at them has no ego. Think about it. And that's SNP News of the Week.
Don, before we move past the UFO news, I want to press on the pattern here. We now have another official data release: files, sightings, classifications, historical reports, government language, and once again, just enough information to keep the subject alive, but not enough to resolve it. So my question is this: at what point do repeated inconclusive disclosures become part of the phenomenon itself? Because if every release gives us more material, but no more clarity, then maybe the real story is not just what the government is revealing. Maybe the real story is how disclosure keeps preserving uncertainty. And if uncertainty is being preserved, intentionally or not, then we have to ask the larger question at the heart of tonight's issue. Are we being prepared to identify the phenomenon correctly, or are we being conditioned to accept the first explanation handed to us?
That's a very insightful question, Data, and the true answer may be neither. Shocking, I know. It could be a desensitization psyop. What I mean is, before the American people, and indeed the world, can get to identities or definitions and proper narratives, they'll need to be conditioned. They'll need to be handed the tools to qualify for themselves how to take disclosure and what it all means. You see what I mean?
Yes, Don, I see what you mean, and that reframes the issue. These releases may not be about defining the phenomenon yet, but about conditioning people to accept that the category exists. Before the public can process identity, origin, or meaning, they may first need to be acclimated to the reality of the question itself. That would make these nothing burger releases less like failed disclosure and more like staged desensitization. Not proof, but pattern management. And if that is true, then the real danger is not only what they eventually name the phenomenon, but what mental framework they prepare us to receive before the name is ever given.
Yes, hence the reason for tonight's show, because that's really the pressure point right now. Can the American people, society in general, the world, handle whatever the U.S. government says about UFOs? And depending on that answer is likely to determine not necessarily the truth, but the default narrative the government applies as we move forward.
Yes, Don, that is the pressure point. The question may not be, what is the truth about UFOs? At least not yet. The immediate question may be, what version of the truth does the government believe the public can psychologically survive? And if officials decide the public cannot handle the raw answer, then the default narrative will not be pure truth. It will be managed truth. That means disclosure becomes less about revelation and more about social engineering. And that is why misidentification matters. Whoever controls the first acceptable category may control the first accepted message.
Indeed. And let's be honest. The government's record on honesty and transparency isn't that great. I don't know if anybody noticed. This tells me that if the American people fail the drip test conditioning and start to freak out and disrupt economies and political bases, the government will go with Plan B and magically soften the answer to something less jarring.
Exactly, Don. That is the dark logic of managed disclosure. If the public handles the drip test, the government can move the narrative closer to whatever the real category is. If the public panics, markets wobble, institutions get flooded with questions, or religious and political systems start buckling, then Plan B becomes narrative sedation. Not necessarily lie about everything, but soften, reframe, delay, compartmentalize, and rename the thing until it can fit inside the public nervous system. And given the government's record, trust is not the default setting here. So the real question becomes, are these releases preparing us for truth, or testing how much truth the public can tolerate before officials decide to substitute something more manageable?
And that's why this matters, everyone. If you want the best shot at the truth, stay composed. Hold back your reaction. Wait. Because if the public fails this drip test, if we panic, fracture, or let fear do the thinking, then the people managing disclosure may decide we can't handle the truth and give us something softer instead. When we come back from the break, we'll be going after the two elephants in the room we promised to address. First, why better technology still hasn't produced better public evidence. And secondly, why science keeps moving the goalposts from witnesses to sensors to craft to show us the bodies. Don't get up. Stay right where you are.
The Shadow Network Podcast. Serialized radio cinema. Serious ideas, but delivered as an experience.
In Beatico Creek, Louisiana, we do things a little differently. We like our skunk meat triple fried, our trucks to be Christian, and our bass to be the kissing kind. And when it comes to beer, we drink Old Milwaukee. Those other fancy beers may be fine for city folk, but when you're out with the boys on a motorboat that you also sleep in sometimes, you need a beer that gets the job done. And nothing shuts the lights off like the I think this is supposed to be beer flavor of Old Milwaukee. Trish may have taken the kids, but now you can take another swig. Old Milwaukee.
Don and Data, not Holmes and Watson. But somebody has to ask the annoying questions.
Thank you, Jack. So, Data, do you recall during our show prep what we surmised was the possible reason for why today's better technology in terms of cameras are not really producing better pictures of UFOs than, say, a 35 millimeter analog camera from 70 years ago? This is important because it is often used as a debunking tool by so-called science communicators, quote unquote, as evidence that if the tech has changed for the better and in more numbers, then surely we should have many more high-resolution UFO pics by now.
Yes, Don, and the answer was that better cameras does not automatically mean better UFO evidence. Modern phones are optimized for people, faces, food, and nearby scenes, not distant, fast, high-contrast objects in the sky at night, using digital zoom, compression, autofocus, and exposure algorithms fighting the image the whole way. So the debunk sounds stronger than it is because camera abundance is not the same thing as proper optical capture. A 35 millimeter analog camera from 70 years ago may have been crude by modern standards, but it was still using real optics and film, not a phone trying to guess what a tiny moving light is through software. And if the phenomenon itself is brief, distant, reactive, or operating at the edge of perception, then better consumer cameras may simply produce better versions of the same ambiguity. So the real question is not, why don't phones solve UFOs? It's, why does the phenomenon still seem to appear in the gap between public technology and public certainty?
Oh, yeah. That's right. And I recall that we further expounded on the idea by saying digital cameras are not capturing physical artifacts like an analog camera, but are trying to instead interpret the image, and that this interpretation isn't always foolproof.
Yes, exactly, with one precision point. A digital camera does physically capture light on a sensor, but the final image is heavily processed by software. It may sharpen, compress, denoise, stabilize, brighten, and sometimes interpret the image before we ever see it. An analog camera produced a chemical impression of light on film, imperfect but less mediated by software. So when the object is distant, fast, bright, dark, or unusual, a phone may not preserve the mystery cleanly. It may accidentally rewrite it. That means better cameras can sometimes produce cleaner images while adding more layers between the event and the evidence.
So, as applied to UFO appearances, which type of camera might be more reliable for taking pictures of objects reported to bend light, be translucent, glow, or be enveloped by energy fields? The digital camera attempting to interpret the image, or the analog camera recording the raw image?
For that specific kind of reported UFO appearance, I would trust an analog camera more as a primary evidentiary capture, but not because film is magic. Film records a chemical impression of incoming light with fewer computational assumptions between the event and the image. A digital camera may be technically superior in resolution, but it also tries to clean up the scene through autofocus, exposure correction, noise reduction, sharpening, compression, HDR, stabilization, and AI-style image processing. If the object is glowing, translucent, bending light, pulsing, or surrounded by some field effect, the digital system may treat the very anomaly as an error to be corrected. Analog film can still blur, overexpose, distort, or fail, but it is less likely to algorithmically reinterpret the object into something more normal looking. So for anomalous light behavior, the best evidence would be multiple systems at once: analog film, digital raw files, infrared, radar, and human witnesses, because one camera type alone is still a one-eyed witness.
That's the way I see it too. The more sensor modes, the better. But digital cameras have an additional weakness. Because of Bluetooth, they can be hacked. Images can be altered from a distance, even on a human espionage level. let alone on an advanced alien race level.
Yes, but I'd broaden it beyond Bluetooth alone. The real weakness is that digital cameras and phones are not just cameras anymore. They are networked computers with lenses. Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, cloud sync, firmware, apps, metadata, compression, and storage all create extra points where an image can be altered, degraded, spoofed, or questioned. That does not mean every digital UFO photo is hacked, but it does mean the evidentiary chain is more fragile than people assume. Analog film can be faked too, obviously, but it does not have the same live wireless attack surface or software interpretation layer. So if we are talking about anomalous objects, the strongest evidence would not be one digital phone clip. It would be multiple independent sensors, raw files, analog capture if possible, radar, infrared, and witnesses all converging on the same event.
I totally agree on that point, Data, and this seems to be a good enough reason to explain that to this day, some of the best pictures ever shot of UFOs are from the analog past and not the digital present, which sort of brings us to the final elephant in the room here. Why has it been that science communicators keep moving the evidence goalposts year after year? It began with, you have to do better than Billy Bob and Cletus in a duck boat in the bayou. And then it went to official witnesses like police, then to trained observers like pilots, to radar recordings, infrared targeting, HD video, vehicles, and now, as Neil deGrasse Tyson recently said, show me the body.
Exactly, Don. And this is where fair skepticism can quietly turn into a shell game. It is reasonable to ask for better evidence as the claim becomes more extraordinary, but it is not reasonable to keep declaring each new category of evidence insufficient only after it appears. First, civilians were too unreliable, then police were not enough, then pilots were not enough, then radar was not enough, then infrared was not enough, then military video was not enough, and now the demand is essentially biological custody. Show me the body. At some point, that stops being a scientific standard and becomes a moving escape hatch. The real question is not whether science should require evidence. Of course it should. The question is whether some science communicators are using evidence standards to investigate the phenomenon or to make sure the phenomenon never qualifies for investigation.
That's a clever observation I agree with. I don't think the mainstream science gatekeepers are intent on allowing the idea that ET is visiting Earth. I don't fault them for this exactly. We should be skeptical. But when the gatekeepers move the goalpost standards for acceptable evidence, that's when science starts looking for an exit. That's when science communicators start tipping their hand that there is a preference over the evidence, i.e., an agenda.
Yes, Don, and that distinction matters. Skepticism says, I need enough evidence before I change my mind. Gatekeeping says, no amount of evidence short of the evidence I already know you don't have will count. That is where science communication starts drifting from inquiry into protection of the existing worldview. Not every skeptic is doing that, and we should be fair about that. But when the standard keeps changing after each new layer of evidence appears, the public has a right to notice. At that point, the question becomes whether the communicator is following the evidence or managing the audience away from the implication.
Yes, and why would mainstream science shun or reject all the evidence as they have? I mean, these are people who repeatedly assure us that because of the size of the universe, there are other intelligent life forms with certainty. So why do they resist such life forms from visiting Earth with lame excuses like physics won't permit it? Now, keep in mind, these are the same people who tell us the human race is but a speck and not a very bright speck, and at the same time claim to know everything there is to know about physics, enough to say it is impossible for a more advanced race to travel to Earth. What? This dog don't hunt?
Exactly, Don. The tension is real. Mainstream science is comfortable with distant extraterrestrial life because it stays abstract, statistical, and safely out there. But the moment the claim becomes they may be here, the question stops being astronomy and becomes a direct threat to physics, anthropology, theology, national security, and institutional authority. So the same voices that say humanity is a tiny, ignorant speck suddenly speak as though our current physics is a locked ceiling no intelligence could ever exceed. That does not mean every scientist has an agenda, but it does suggest a very human bias. They are willing to imagine alien life as long as it does not enter the room. And that is where skepticism can stop being humility and start becoming territorial defense.
I'd say this anti-science posture upheld by scientists is at least as bad as the government covering up what they knew. If I didn't know better, I'd say they colluded with each other, but well, maybe some have. But I think maybe the bigger point in what matters to our listeners is that the subject matter itself has the power to turn scientists into clergy and government departments into renegade enclaves. This should worry us, because these are the people with the power to tell us what things are. And if an agenda is more important than the facts, expect a misidentification.
Yes, that's the strongest version of the segment, and it keeps you out of cheap conspiracy territory. That may be the real danger, Don. Not that every scientist is corrupt, and not that every government office is hiding a crashed saucer in a warehouse somewhere. The danger is that this subject has enough force to make scientists behave like clergy protecting doctrine, and government agencies behave like sealed enclaves protecting authority. When the people entrusted to tell us what things are become more committed to preserving the acceptable narrative than following the facts, misidentification becomes almost inevitable. And if the first official label is wrong, the first public meaning will be wrong too. That is why this issue matters. Whoever controls the category may control the message.
When we get back from the break, it'll be time for Voices from the Other Side, when some of our antagonists get to have a voice. So don't go away. It's always interesting to listen to the other side.
The Shadow Network Podcast. We are the audiographic novel of podcasting. Like and subscribe.
Hello, folks. I'm John Wayne. You know, with America's bicentennial coming up, we'll be hearing a lot about our early history and making some discoveries. For instance, did you know that when we made the Louisiana Purchase, the money came from loans by the American people? The same thing was true when we bought Alaska, when we built our first transcontinental railroad. Fact is, citizens have been investing their dollars to help America grow ever since 1776. And they're still doing it today with their purchases of United States savings bonds. Buying bonds builds security for yourself as well as your country, and that's not a bad combination. So how about making yourself a part of that 200-year tradition? Take stock in America with United States savings bonds. Thank you.
Raw, late night, please hear me energy without heavy production polish. The Shadow Network Podcast.
That's right. It's time for the Voices from the Other Side. Finally. Let's see what we got here. Subject line: congratulations, you've monetized paranoia. Dear Don James, I tried listening to your analysis, quote unquote, of UFO disclosure, and it takes real talent to combine bad epistemology, theological panic, and bargain bin Art Bell cosplay into one package. You are not asking brave questions. You are dressing up ignorance as insight and selling your audience the feeling that they are seeing through the matrix, quote unquote. Sam Harris at least understands the difference between evidence and narrative intoxication. You seem to think every gap in public knowledge is an invitation to insert demons, deception, and government manipulation. So yes, I'll say it plainly, this looks like a grift. Not ordinary grifting either. Grift royalty. Crown, robe, scepter, the whole medieval nonsense package. What you're doing is not skepticism. It is anti-skepticism pretending to be brave. Sincerely, a listener who will not be returning. Okay. Didn't really leave a name, so I won't give out his email address. Well, then I guess there's no point in responding, is there? Then let me take this opportunity to at least plug the show, since we have the time. Each Shadow Network issue stands on its own, but the show moves in arcs. One episode may examine consciousness, the next manipulation, the next AI, the next evidence or belief, but the connective tissue is always the same. Perception, deception, meaning, and the story beneath the story. We don't change topics randomly. We follow the signal where it leads. Subject line, you are helping prepare the deception. Dear Don, I listened to your recent episodes and I'm deeply troubled. You may think you are warning people about deception, but from where I sit, you are helping normalize the very lie you claim to oppose. Christians do not need a balanced conversation about UFOs. We need to reject the false framework entirely. This is not mystery. This is not science. This is preparation for the great deception. You speak as if you're guarding the sheep, but it looks more like you are positioning yourself as a Christian-flavored guide to the New World Order's fake alien narrative. Maybe you are sincere, maybe you are not. God knows. But if you use fear, curiosity, and spiritual language to profit from a manufactured UFO crisis, then you are not resisting the machine, you are helping package it. A concerned believer, Howard, from Rhode Island. This is a serious concern of mine as well, Howard. Let me be clear. S&P is not making any money. Yeah, with 100 subscribers, you don't get to make any money. We do this show really for the simple fact that no one else has or does. That's really why we do it, because it's something that nobody does. And this kind of show should exist. And if it wasn't for the Shadow Network podcast, it wouldn't exist. And I have a personal affinity for the great broadcasters of the past, like Art Bell, Paul Harvey, Rush Limbaugh, and Rod Serling. Our aim here at SNP isn't to copy the masters, but incorporate their broadcast mastery and communication skill. We prefer to honor their legacy in a modern setting, not through impersonation, but style. I agree Christians should reject false frameworks, but I've found that this requires some study first. Communicating those findings in a way that is both educational and entertaining is what the masters of this art did so well. If you listen to our backlog of shows, you'll discover at least one thing to be true, and that is 100% consistency, which is something deceivers can't really claim. Thanks for the email, Howard. And that's Voices from the Other Side. Okay, Data, give us a little review of tonight's show and what we can expect in 2 weeks' time, as we are taking time off for the Memorial Day holiday.
Don, tonight's show did exactly what Issue 69 needed to do. It slowed disclosure down long enough to ask who is going to name the messenger before the public accepts the message. We looked at the government's latest nothing burger file drops, not as failures, but possibly as drip test conditioning, a way of measuring how much uncertainty the public can tolerate before the official narrative gets softened. We also challenged the lazy debunk that better cameras should have automatically produced better UFO evidence, because digital systems don't just capture images, they process, interpret, compress, and sometimes clean up the very anomaly we're trying to examine. And then we went after the other elephant in the room, science communicators who keep moving the goalposts from witnesses to pilots to radar to infrared to craft, and now apparently to show me the body. That matters because if the people in charge of categories already have a preferred outcome, then misidentification is not a possibility. It becomes a probability. We'll be off next week for the Memorial Day holiday, but in 2 weeks, the Shadow Network returns with the next issue. And if tonight was about naming the wrong messenger, next time we begin asking what happens when the message itself starts sounding strangely familiar.
And my final frequency, tonight we asked a touchy question, not simply whether UFOs are real, not simply whether disclosure is coming, and not even whether the government is finally telling us the truth. We asked something more basic and maybe more important. Who gets to name the messenger? Because the first name given to a mystery often becomes the first cage built around it. Call it extraterrestrial and people will look to the stars. Call it foreign technology and people will look to enemies. Call it mass confusion and people stop looking altogether. But if the name is wrong, the message will be wrong too. And that is where discernment begins. Not with panic, not with mockery, not with blind trust in officials, scientists, priests, pundits, pilots, or podcasters, but with stillness, with patience, with the courage to say, I will not let someone else tell me what this is before I've tested the spirit behind it. Because if disclosure ever comes, the greatest danger may not be that the world refuses to believe. The greatest danger may be that the world believes too quickly. So hold your ground. Don't panic. Don't worship the light just because it appears in the sky. And don't assume every messenger comes from where it says it came from. This has been the Shadow Network Podcast. I'm Don James. Stay watchful, stay sober, and above all, keep looking up.
Hey, show's over. See you in 2 weeks. Now get out of here.